class. In today's lesson, we're going to be going over application questions that's related to linear algebra. The first question reads, the labor cost $C for a plumber's visit is given by the equation C is equal to 85.50 T plus 45, where T is the time in hours spent by the plumber on the job. Part A wants you to sketch the function, just meaning the equation that was shown above. So let's find both the x-intercept as well as your y-intercept. In this case of here, you should be able to recognize that this value of C, in this case, that's like essentially y, and t in this case of it is like x, okay? And in this case of here, you can find out what is your y-intercept because that's your value of c, because that's your in the slope intercept form. So your value of your y-intercept is going to equal to 45 in this case. To find out what is your x-intercept, you have to sub in y is equal to 0, or in this case, you sub in c is equal to 0. So if you do that, then therefore this would be your equation. Let's move 45 to the other side by subtracting 45 to both sides, and then we'll divide both sides by 85.50. Hence, therefore, you're going to get a x-intercept where t is going to roughly equal to 0.53. So therefore, when you are graphing it, therefore, this is what you should or might be using instead. You could use any different types of scale that you like, but as you can see here, I've decided to go up by 0.5 along my x-axis, and I went up by an increment of 10, okay? And obviously, you can choose whatever increment you like. What I do want to talk about is that generally for application questions, we don't really care about anything that's found on this side of here. So essentially what I'm meaning is we don't really care about the negative x values. And the reason why it is for most of the time, okay, this is for like about 7 out of 10 times, but most things in this case, if you're looking at the x variable is time in this case, there's no such thing as a negative hour, okay? That's the reason why we don't look anything on the negative x values, because that doesn't make any sense in the real life sense. So we don't really look at that. And similarly in this case, most of the time as well, we don't really care about things that have a negative y value. That's the reason why I've deliberately chopped off the Cartesian plane and only showed you the first half, because you can't have a negative cost in this case over here. So for now, just omit that. But it is kind of necessary to show the negative x values, because you might need to include the x-intercepts as shown over here, okay? So that should have been a negative 0.53, my bad. So if you're plotting it, therefore, this is what your graph would look like. So let's go to part B. Now, part B wants you to find how long was a plumber on the job if he earned this amount of money. So in this case, because that's your value of C, we sub in that value, and then we'll rearrange to solve for T. So we'll subtract both sides by 45, and then we're going to divide both sides by 85.50. Hence, your answer is going to be roughly 2.5 hours, okay? Now for question 2, very similar question. Find out what is your y-intercept, what is your x-intercept, and then graph it. So your y-intercept is going to be this constant over here, so 0.44. The x-intercept is found by subbing y is equal to 0 or subbing c is equal to 0 in this case over here, and then rearranging. So if you do that, move the 0.44 to the other side, divide both sides, by 0.88. That's going to equal to negative 0.5. When you're drawing this, you need to choose the appropriate scale. So in this case, this is what I've actually done instead. And then just pretty much plot the points along. So therefore, this is what my graph looks like. And notice how I've labeled both my x-intercept and y-intercept value. Now, once I've done that for part B, we're going to substitute your C value as $4.16 and then rearrange to solve for T. So in this case, I'm going to subtract both sides by 0.44. So that will get rid of this part over here. I'll then divide both sides by 0.88. Hence, your value of T is going to equal to roughly 4.23 minutes. For question 3, this is going to involve writing a pair of simultaneous equations. So it says 1,000 tickets to a show were sold. Adult tickets cost $8.50 and children's were $4.50. $7,300 was raised from the sale of the tickets. How many of each type were sold? So when you're trying to do these types of questions, it's really important that the first thing you do is define the variables. So define what objects or things that's actually been given to you. So in this case, because simultaneous equations involves finding like the values of x and y, so two variables, you should be defining those two variables and writing them as well. So in this case of here, let's say that x is going to be the number of adult tickets, let y be the number of children tickets that's been sold. Now, your first sentence already tells you a clue, and you can write therefore one equation with it. It says 1,000 tickets to a show were sold. So in this case, you've got adult tickets, you've got children's tickets, and the total of those tickets should be equal to 1,000. So therefore, your first equation should be x plus y is equal to 1,000. Your second equation says each adult ticket costs $8.50, each children's ticket costs $4.50, and when they sold all those tickets together, they made a sale that was worth 7,300. So therefore, your second equation should be this over here, which is related to the actual cost of it. And now that you've got the two equations, you can therefore solve for x and y. So in this case over here, I'm going to use the elimination method. So what I'll do is I'm going to make the y values the same so I can cancel out the y. So I'll multiply both sides of the equation by 4.5. So if I do that, this is what my equation would now look like. And now I'm going to subtract it to cancel out y. Therefore, this is what my equation would look like. I'll divide both sides by 4 to solve for x. Therefore, x is going to equal 700. Substitute that in to find out what the y is. So substitute it into the most easiest equation. So I deliberately substitute it into this equation here. Therefore, your y value is going to be 1,000 minus 700, which is going to equal to 300 in this case. And once you do this, it's always important for a worded question that you must write your answer as a written statement. So therefore, you'd write something similar to this. You'd write 700 adult tickets were sold, because we said that x was your adult tickets, whereas y was the number of children's tickets in this. So this question over here is very similar to the previous example that we've went through. So in this case, let's do the same thing where we need to define the variables. In this case over here, it's talking about chicken dishes and beef dishes. So therefore, let x be the number of chicken dishes that you've served, and let y equal to the number of beef dishes that you served. In this case over here, it's saying that you're serving 250 people in a banquet, so for a feast, okay? So in this case over here, it makes sense that the number of chicken dishes and the number of beef dishes in total should be equal to 250, assuming that each person has one dish. So therefore, x plus y is equal to 250. But you can also write another equation that's related to the cost, because it does tell you that he spent $1,500 and they've given you the cost of each individual dish. So therefore, it should be 5x plus 7y is equal to that. Now, in order to do this, let's eliminate it again. So I'm going to eliminate x by multiplying everything by 5. So therefore, my new equation will look like this. I will therefore subtract it to eliminate x. Hence, you're going to have this as your new equation. Solve for y by dividing both sides by -2. So therefore, in this case, that should be ready as y. Y is equal to 125. Substitute that into one of the equations. Always use the easiest one. In this case, you can easily see that your value of x is also going to equal to 125. And always write your answer as a written statement. Okay, so you'd write 125 for each type of dish. That's a shortened answer over here. For question 5, let's first define what the variables are. So in this case over here, your variables is going to be 2-point questions as well as 4-point questions. So let's say x is the number of 2-mark questions that's on the test, and let y be the number of 4-mark questions that's going to be on the test, okay? In this case over here, it tells you that there are going to be 40 questions in total. So in this case, you could easily write an equation that x plus y is therefore going to be equal to 40, okay? So remember, x and y are the questions, not the number of points. The second equation that we can write up is going to be related to the number of points in total. We know that the test is going to have 100, so it's going to be something x something y is equal to 100 in this case. And in this case, because the question is worth 2 marks, it's going to be 2x plus a 4y is equal to 100. And now, again, use the elimination method. So I'm going to cancel out x by multiplying this equation by 2. And then subtract, and then this is the value you should get for y. Sub that into one of the equations to solve for x. So therefore, x is going to therefore be equal to 30 in this case, and always write a written statement to answer the questions, okay? Now, question 6 over here, you want to find out the cost of a ruler and pen. So we define the variable. So let x be the cost of a ruler, let y equal to the cost of a pen. The first sentence over here says the cost of 2 rulers and a pen is $6. So you'd write 2x plus 1y is equal to 6, and you'd say the difference, so the difference meaning subtraction, between the cost of 3 rulers and 2 pens is $2. So you say 3x minus 2y is equal to $2. And in this case, you just solve it using the elimination method again. And in order to do this, what I'll do is I'm going to multiply the first equation by 2. Once the coefficients in front of y are the same, what I'll do is I'm going to add both equations together to cancel out the y. So if I add this over here, I'm going to therefore have 7x is going to equal to 14. X is therefore going to equal to 2. Sub that into one of the equations. And if you do that, rearrange it. So therefore you're going to have 4 plus y is equal to 6. 6 is therefore going to equal to 2. That should have been another step over here. Okay. And once you've done that, then you need to finally answer what the question is. So the question wants you to find a cost of a ruler and a pen. So you already found out the cost of a ruler is $2. This is also going to be $2. So therefore the cost of a ruler and a pen would be $4. Okay, so 2 plus 2 is 4. Question 7 reads, Sally has bought a Victorian era house that needs all the electrical wires to be replaced. She finds 2 electricians advertised in the local paper. So she can either see Juan or Dot. And as you can see, they've got the different rates over there. What I do want to draw your attention to is that, as you can see, Juan charges a very low base amount initially, but his rate, his per hour cost is a bit more higher than Dot in this case. And because that's the case over here, it would mean that over time, in the long term, Juan will be a lot more expensive as opposed to Dot in this case over here. The question wants you to find the number of hours worked that will result in the same charge. So essentially, you're trying to use simultaneous equations where the cost is the same. So what is that time when the cost is the same? So in this case, let's first generate an equation for both of these electricians. So in this case over here, I'm going to define both of my variables in terms of C and T. And in this case, for Juan's one, because his flat rate is $45 to come see on site, it's going to be 45 plus 30T. Dot's equation can be represented by C is going to be equal to 60 plus 28T. And now that I've got both of the equations, let's solve it. In this case over here, because they're already both in the slope-intercept form, they're both isolated solved, I'll use the substitution method. So I'll equate both equations together. So therefore, this would be my equation over here. I'm going to move T to one side of the equation and all the constants to the other side. So therefore, this is what you get. Simplify that and divide both sides by 2. Hence, you're going to get an answer of 7.5. So that would mean that after 7.5 hours exactly, the cost for both electrons will be identical to one another. So to find out what the actual cost is, okay, the question doesn't actually ask you to find the cost, but if you were to find the cost, then you sub T equals 7.5 into one of the equations, and therefore you'd see that the cost would therefore be $270 for both of these electricians, okay? And if you were to kind of graph this, then this is going to be your answer over here. And it's really important, again, that for worded problems that you do include a written statement over here. So this question over here is very similar to the previous question. So essentially the overview of this question is that there are 2 bus companies. There's Copperfield College, there's Copperfield, and then there's St. Albans, okay? And both buses companies offer different rates. And essentially what you want to do is you want to try to find out what is the best deal for both Ryan as well as Joshua, depending on where they live, okay? So in this case, because they're currently in the city, Ryan lives more close to the city, so he lives in St. Albans, which is 4 kilometers away, and Josh lives in Kings Park. So you're trying to find the best bus that's more affordable, more cheaper for each individual, okay? So in this case over here, let's do the same thing where we define each variable. So C is going to be the cost, and let X be the distance in terms of the mileage that the bus needs to go to, okay? So therefore, since this over here is the information to write the equation for the cost of Copperfield, it's going to be C is equal to 5 plus 1.5 per kilometer, because this per kilometer means it's the rate, so that's the gradient in this case over here. And the equation for St. Albans is going to be 3.6 plus 1.75. Because both equations are already solved, I will therefore use the substitution method and equate both equations together to solve my simultaneous equation. So if I do this, we'll move all the x's to one side of the equation and move the constants to the other side, and therefore divide both sides by 0.25, and therefore you will get an x value of 5.6. So that means that the distance for both companies to be cheaper will be 5 5.6 kilometers in this case over here. And although the question is not asking you to find what is the cost when the distance are the same, I'm still going to do it anyhow because it is going to help me down the track. So in this case over here, it's going to be $13.40. And although the question doesn't actually ask me to graph it, it is really important that to solve some of these questions, and for you to make sense of it, it is really important for you to graph it. And once we've graphed it over here, you can pretty much therefore finally answer this question over here. So in this case, if you notice that you have for your graph, the graph that's in the red line, that's the line representing Copperfield. And you can see that Copperfield is initially going to be more expensive, which is why it's higher than the blue line, which is for St. Albans. But over time, it's going to therefore be a lot more cheaper. And it's going to be cheaper after 5.6 kilometers, which what you've solved over here, okay? And since we know that Ryan lives more close to the city, it makes more sense that Ryan should totally opt for St. Albans and that Josh should opt for Copperfield College based on their relative distances from the city. Question 9 reads, Happy Cruises operates a boat hire business at Caroline Springs. It charges either a flat fee of $350 per day, meaning you pay a upfront payment of $350 and you can drive as many kilometers as you like, or alternatively you have another option where you pay $220 upfront, but also you need to pay an extra $2 per kilometer that you've traveled. The first question wants you to find or write an equation for both of these different options, okay? So in this case, let's define both of the variables. So let's say C is equal to cost and let X be the distance that you've traveled. In our very first equation, since it's not dependent on the kilometers that we've driven at all, therefore your equation is going to be simply C is equal to 350. We don't need to include X because it's not really dependent on the distance you traveled at all. It's unlimited. And for the second option over here, it's going to therefore be 220 plus 2x because that's the rate in this case over here. So we've done part A. For part B, you need to sketch this, okay? Now, in order to sketch the very first one, that's pretty easy. It's going to be a horizontal straight line like so as shown over here. But to show for the second graph, you need to find both the x and y intercepts. You already know that for the second graph, your y-intercept is going to be 220. Now, so therefore, let's just find your x-intercept. So we'll sub y is equal to 0 and therefore solve for x by moving 220 to the other side. So we'll subtract both sides by 220 and then divide both sides by 2. Hence x is going to equal to negative 110. So therefore we can graph it like this. So that's the answer for part B. And finally, for part C requires you to use simultaneous equations because you're trying to find the number of kilometers you can travel so that the second method is cheaper, okay? Now, we can already tell that the second method, which is this one over here, is going to be cheaper when it's the number of kilometers is going to be from 0 to whatever that value. So let's use simultaneous equations to find out what is this point of intersection, okay? So in this case over here, because both values are solved already, C is already solved, we'll use this substitution method. So therefore, I've equated both the equations together and therefore I want to solve for x. Hence, x is going to be equal to 65 kilometers in this case over here. Now, I'm also going to find out what the cost is, although the question doesn't actually want you to do that at all. So if you sub that back in, you're going to get a cost value of 350 degrees, which is going to be the exact same amount, which should be clearly evident anyway, since this is a horizontal straight line. So finally, to answer this question, make sure you are writing this as a word statement. To answer this question, you'd say it's cheaper to go with the second option if the total distance that you traveled is less than 65 kilometers. And for the very last question over here, you're doing the exact same thing. So firstly, write down equations for both of these different options. So therefore, you should get this over here. For part B, you're going to now graph this. So for the second option, you're going to have a horizontal straight line where 330 is going to be. So that's going to be this over here. For the very first option, you need to find y and x intercepts as shown over here. So if you graph it, then your graph should look something similar to this. And to answer part C, you're trying to find out what distances in order for the fixed charge method to be cheaper. So the fixed charge method is this one over here. So you want to find out when is this option cheaper, and in this case, based on this graph, you can clearly see it's going to be more cheaper when it's after this distance over here. So let's use solve for that by using simultaneous equations. So therefore, equate both equations using the substitution method. X is going to equal to 75 kilometers. So therefore, that would have already technically answer this question, but again, I'm solving for us, so let's just find out both values, although it's not necessary, and it should obviously be equal to the 330, which is the horizontal line. So make sure you are answering this question as a worded statement, and that's what I've got over here.